In 1963, one voice drew 250,000 people to march for justice. 15 years later, another voice convinced over 900 people to drink poison. Both leaders wielded the same psychological force, charisma. The difference was not in how it worked on people, it was in why they used it. And that line between inspiration and manipulation is far thinner than you think. In the heat of the American Civil Rights Movement, a young Baptist minister stood at the Lincoln Memorial and spoke with a cadence that carried across the National Mall. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't just command attention. He shaped the mood of a crowd with every pause and every rising note. On August 28, 1963, more than 250,000 people gathered in Washington, drawn by the promise of justice and the power of a single voice. His words, carefully chosen and echoing biblical rhythms, did more than inspire. They turned hope into action, and action into policy. King's speeches were not just performances, they became a rallying point for a movement that demanded change. The Montgomery bus boycott, sparked by his leadership in 1955, mobilized over 40,000 people and forced the end of segregated buses. His ability to connect with both heart and mind helped transform outrage into organized, nonviolent resistance. Every march, every sermon, built trust, not just in him, but in the vision he shared. That trust paved the way for real change. In 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act. A year later, the Voting Rights Act followed. King's charisma didn't just move crowds, it moved laws. Through his presence and his words, he showed how charisma, when grounded in empathy and shared purpose, can unite strangers into a force for justice. The echoes of his voice still ripple through history, a reminder that charisma can uplift, empower, and give courage to those who need it most. On a quiet weekday afternoon, millions of viewers tuned in as Oprah Winfrey sat across from her guest, listening with an openness that felt personal, even through a television screen. Oprah's style was not about grand speeches or fiery calls to action. Instead, she invited audiences into intimate conversations, often sharing her own struggles with vulnerability and hope. This willingness to disclose her personal story, including childhood trauma, setbacks, and triumphs, created a sense of trust that extended well beyond the studio. The effect was measurable. When Oprah announced a new title for her book club, publishers watched sales surge, sometimes by hundreds of thousands of copies in a matter of days. In 2007, her book club selection sent sales of The Road by Cormac McCarthy soaring, pushing it to the top of bestseller lists. Audience loyalty was not just a feeling, it showed up in numbers. Her show consistently drew over 7 million viewers at its peak, and her endorsement could turn unknown authors into household names. Oprah used that trust to drive real-world change. Through the Oprah Winfrey Foundation, she has granted more than $400 million to educational and charitable causes, funding scholarships and building schools. Her approach demonstrates how charisma, when paired with empathy and authenticity, can mobilize people for collective good. The connection she built with viewers did not just inspire, it empowered them to act, give, and believe in the possibility of change. In the late 1970s, a charismatic preacher named Jim Jones convinced hundreds of followers to leave their homes and families behind. He promised a utopia, a place free from racism and inequality, deep in the jungles of Guyana. The move was more than a change of scenery. It was the start of a pattern seen in dangerous groups, isolating members from the outside world, cutting off contact with loved ones, and creating an environment where questioning the leader felt impossible. Survivors remember the gradual shift. At first, Jones's sermons sounded compassionate, even revolutionary. But in Jonestown, trust turned into obedience. Rules multiplied, letters were censored, dissenters faced public shaming or worse. By 1978, the group had grown to nearly 1,000 residents, many of them children. When outside scrutiny threatened Jones's control, he demanded absolute loyalty, culminating in a tragedy that claimed 918 lives, including more than 300 children. The story of Jonestown is a warning: unchecked charisma, when paired with isolation and control, can turn hope into catastrophe. Elizabeth Holmes stepped onto tech conference stages with a steady gaze and a voice that rarely wavered. She wore a black turtleneck, echoed the style of tech icons, and spoke of a future where a single drop of blood could unlock a world of medical answers. Investors, board members and journalists watched as she promised to disrupt the healthcare industry. By 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion, employing more than 800 people and landing deals with major chains like Walgreens. Holmes's confidence inspired trust at the highest levels. Her board included former secretaries of state and military leaders. Behind closed doors, though, the technology failed basic tests. Demonstrations were carefully staged, and employees who raised questions faced intimidation or dismissal. In October 2015, a Wall Street Journal investigation revealed that Theranos's devices couldn't deliver on their promises. Patients received inaccurate test results, and the company's house of cards began to collapse. The fallout was swift: investor lawsuits, regulatory bans, and criminal charges. Holmes's charisma had shielded the truth, showing how even seasoned professionals can be blinded when vision and charm overpower evidence. In a packed convention hall, a populist speaker steps up to the microphone. The energy in the room shifts as the crowd leans in, waiting for the next line. The speaker's voice rises above the noise, drawing sharp lines between us and them. Phrases like "real citizens" and "corrupt elites" echo off the walls, repeated by hundreds of voices. The chant grows louder, each repetition fueling a sense of unity among supporters, while outsiders become targets for blame. Signs wave overhead, bearing slogans that simplify complex issues into good versus evil. The speaker pauses, then calls for action, and the audience erupts in applause. This rally, held on October 15, 2022, offers a clear example of how charisma can polarize. By tapping into shared frustrations and framing opponents as threats, the speaker transforms individual discontent into collective fervor. The crowd's emotional response is not accidental. It is shaped by the careful use of moral binaries and rhythmic chants that amplify group identity and drown out dissent. Charisma works by activating deep-seated social and emotional instincts. Psychologists have found that charismatic people often use a blend of expressiveness, emotional contagion, and subtle social cues to gain influence. When someone speaks with energy, uses vivid gestures, or tells stories that inspire awe, the brain's fast, intuitive system takes over. In laboratory studies, people exposed to charismatic speakers reported feeling more intense emotions, even when their faces stayed calm. This internal surge, sometimes called the awestruck effect, makes it harder to think critically or question what is being said. Social scientists like Robert Cialdini have outlined principles that charismatic figures use, such as reciprocity, social proof, and authority. These levers make people more likely to comply, even against their own interests. The halo effect, where one positive trait like confidence makes us assume someone is trustworthy, also plays a role. In fact, research shows that emotional expressiveness alone can boost likability by a moderate amount, with effect sizes around D of 0.5. Together, these mechanisms explain how charismatic leaders can turn ordinary moments into movements, and why even seasoned professionals sometimes follow without question. Charisma offers powerful rewards: status, influence, and belonging. Leaders use it to motivate, persuade, and sometimes to shield themselves from scrutiny. The motives behind charismatic behavior often fall into three categories: social payoff, personal validation, and structural advantage. A leader might crave admiration or seek to control a narrative, while organizations can reward charm over substance, making manipulation easier to hide. Recognizing these incentives is the first step in protecting yourself. There is a simple checklist that can help. Pause, verify, consult. When you feel swept up by someone's energy or promises, pause to notice your own excitement. Verify claims by checking facts, not just stories or endorsements. Consult with others outside the group, especially those with different perspectives. Red flags include rapid intimacy, secrecy, and forced choices between extremes. If someone urges you to share too much, discourages outside contact, or frames every issue as black or white, it is time to step back. Charisma can inspire, but it should never demand blind trust. Awareness turns influence into a conscious choice, not a reflex. Charisma shapes every boardroom, ballot box, and social feed today. As research shows, its power depends on motive, not method. The real safeguard is awareness, learning to question not just what moves us, but why. Influence is inevitable, and manipulation is not. Stay curious and choose your leaders wisely.